Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. This session is for everyone who's interested in getting involved in science policy or who's already involved and wants to learn how they can get a little more involved or find new opportunities. I'm Elizabeth Landau, Director of Public Affairs at AGU, and I'll be covering ways to engage virtually, as well as your moderator for this event. I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Villafranca, who will share best practices for working virtually with policymakers. We will leave plenty of time at the end for some practice and discussion, so please type your questions into the box throughout the session. So let's start with a broad range of ways that scientists can engage in science policy. I'll start with the faster, easier options, and we'll build from there. Social media engagement is a really easy way to get started. Almost all policymakers are on social media and watch social media pretty closely, or they have a staff person who does it for them. They do this because it's a really easy way for them to share their accomplishments and to stay connected with many of their constituents. So it's great to follow policymakers to see what they're posting, to engage with them, and see what they're interested in. You can tag policymakers in posts if you want to get their attention to something that is an issue that matters to you and you think should matter to them. You really want to keep it short and focused. There's a reason that social media has character limits. A lot of the time, they want you to get to the point and make it quick and easy for people to engage. You can also follow us on Twitter for more information, links, and action items to act on science policy issues at AGU SciPolicy. So we welcome you to do that as well. There are lots of other online engagements that you can do as well. You can sign on to petitions and letters. Oftentimes, these are things that you don't need to edit at all. They're already done, or you can make edits to make them more personalized and add points that you think are really important. But either way, they're very quick and easy and just take a minute or two to do. You can also write and call policymakers. So this is a fantastic way, even in our current virtual world, to be able to engage on critical science policy issues. And it's actually a lot quicker and easier than you think it might be. So definitely worth trying. If you're not sure where to start, we have toolkits that make it really easy. So you can find those online, and then you can see all the steps that you need to go through in order to write or call your policymakers and be effective while you're doing it. Like I said, all of this can be done virtually right now, and it's something that can be done virtually going forward as well. It's a standard to be able to write or call them from wherever you are. And it's very easy to find the contact information for them. They all have it on their websites, and it's very quick to connect and share that information that you think is critical for them to hear. Lots of organizations make it very easy to write or call your legislators online. So you can use our AGU website here, actioncenter.agu.org, or there are many others if you'd like to use a different system. The key goal for all of this is really to try to develop relationships over time. That's the most critical thing. So as long as you're working towards those relationships by constant contact or regular contact, that's what you truly want to do. So if you want to take a little more time, get a little more involved, we have some additional options that you can try out. You can join or start a campus science policy group, a group of like-minded people who get together and talk about science policy issues. If you don't have one on your campus already, the National Science Policy Network is a great option. You can work with them and start a group on campus. And you can also arrange other science policy events on campus or virtually. You could have a department seminar in person or virtually that focuses on science policy topics for discussion, or you could put on some kind of event, whether in person or virtual, where local policymakers might come talk to people on your campus about critical science policy issues. There are a lot of options that you can put on locally or virtually. You can also join a broader activism group and use those lessons learned to help encourage science policy work. For example, when I was in grad school, I was part of the National Organization for Women, and that group taught me all kinds of things about activism and getting involved, which I can now apply to science policy. Another great way to get engaged is election engagement. And it's not just the presidential election every 4 years. There are important elections happening every single year, particularly locally. So I know at this point, many of you in the United States may feel like this is a little too soon to be talking about election engagement, but just think about how important it was to be involved in this year's election and how important it will be going forward as well. Encourage your friends, colleagues, students on campus to vote. It's interesting, but the STEM students actually have the lowest voting rates. In the 2018 election, only 34% of STEM students voted. So we really want to encourage increasing that as much as possible. One way you can get involved with elections is to attend a town hall, many of which are virtual. That's a great way to ask science questions, to engage. You can see one of our AGU members, Robbie Goldman here, who is asking a question at a town hall recently. And absolutely vote for science and candidates who support science. A few more things you can do. You can look at what your societies offer. Congressional visits days, either virtual or in person, are a great option. Those really help you go out and talk to policymakers, either online or in person, and give you a lot of the tools to do so and make it much easier. You can serve on a position statement panel or make comments on position statement, which are often what scientific societies use to do a lot of their advocacy work. You can sign up to be a rapid response expert. This could be for media questions. It could be for science policy questions from policymakers. It's a great way to get involved. Or you can join some of these long-term networks. AGU has a Sharing Science network, which is a great group to find all kinds of opportunities where you can get involved throughout the year. Meetings with policymakers, that's a great way to contribute to science policy. You know, a lot of the scientists that we work with are intimidated by it at first, but then after their initial meetings, they realized it was much easier than they thought it would be, and they found it incredibly rewarding. So I definitely recommend trying it if you haven't yet, either in person or again, virtually is a great way to do this. Virtual meetings are the new normal for policymakers right now, and we think this trend is going to continue even after we get back to our usual lives, because it is a great way for them to meet a lot of different constituents. You can schedule a meeting anytime on your own or with colleagues. We recommend that you have meetings with colleagues because it shows the diversity of supporters on an issue and helps you with any nerves you might be feeling. We also have toolkits on this that walk you through every single step you need to take to make this happen, to make it really easy for you to do. Another great option is op-eds and letters to the editor. This is a great way to get policymakers and the community to learn about an issue that is important to you and to society. You need to mention relevant policymakers in order to get their attention, but the offices definitely comb local publications for mentions of them, so this is a good way to get their attention. You need to find the right outlet based on the policymaker that you want to reach. Local is often the best way to go using a local media source. We do have a toolkit on this as well as a recorded webinar. So you can watch those for more tips. If you want to figure out how to do this, we have a great step-by-step guide there. And then if you really feel compelled to engage and you want to take it to the next level, we have a few more ways that you can do so. Election or campaign work that takes a little more time are things like putting on a voter registration drive. Be sure to check out the rules and make sure that you're doing this by the book so that everyone who does register with you is all set to go. You can help get out the vote by making phone calls. There are many organizations that organize this, make it very easy for you. There are also text campaigns, so you can text instead of calling people. Or you can write letters to low propensity voters. Groups like Vote Forward have had a lot of success getting out millions of letters in this way. You can also volunteer for a candidate that you like. There's local, state, federal options. It certainly doesn't have to be a presidential candidate. Find a candidate who you think supports you, supports science, has the right policies that you're looking for, and see if they need your help. It's a great way to get involved and help support a pro-science candidate. A few other options are some long-term outreach programs. So fellowships are great. I think these are some of the most common things that people try and do in terms of science policy work. There's the AGU Congressional Science Fellowship, along with many other societies who sponsor Congressional Science Fellows, where you work in the office of a member of Congress or a congressional committee for 1 year. There are agency fellowships where you work for agencies within the government. And there are many other types of fellowships as well, offering opportunities that are shorter, longer, at different positions. So those are great opportunities in order to get into this world and see the making of science policy every day. Internships are a great option, which I think are often overlooked. They're a wonderful way to get your feet wet in science policy and be involved and see how things are done for a short period of time, where you can network and learn the community and learn the ins and outs of science policy, and from there make your next career move. There are also other programs like AGU's Voices for Science program, which are part-time. They're not something that you do full-time, but you keep up your other work, and then you are also able to have this incredible year-long supportive network where you can do regular outreach activities. And then if you really want to make change, you can consider running for office. I recommend you start small and think about local positions that you could take on. Think about what problem you really want to solve locally and what position would allow you to do that. There are lots of organizations to help you if this is something that you want to do. 314 Action is a great one to help scientists, or She Should Run, which helps female and female identifying candidates run. You can see in this example on the slide here, one of our AGU members, Chris Larson, who was mayor of his town in Colorado for a time. So this can absolutely be you. You can make this happen. So one more thing that you can do right now to get involved in science policy is to sign up for AGU Science Policy Alerts. You'll get more information pushed to you, so you don't even have to think about it. Just text AGU to 52886 to sign up. You'll get our monthly science policy alerts delivered via email once you do so, and that will help you find new opportunities to get engaged. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions about anything I mentioned, please type them in the chat now so we can answer them later during the discussion section. And now I will turn it over to Michael to talk about best practices for engagement.
Thank you, Liz. And hello to everybody. My name is Michael Villafranca, and I am the Senior Specialist on AGU's Public Affairs team. I am going to be talking to you about some tips and tricks to hopefully help you become a better advocate in a virtual setting. Now, I know Liz went over several different options when it comes to different forms of advocacy. So for our best practices today, I'm going to focus on two really common ways that a lot of people do their virtual advocacy, which is via social media and virtual meetings with their policymakers. And please note that these tips can be applied whenever you're engaging with, on the federal level, the state level, or the local level. So we'll start with social media. Social media obviously is used for a number of things. It can be personal, some people use it professional, some people vary depending on the platform. But for advocacy, there are some great benefits. For starters, for social media for advocacy, it provides a massive platform for networking. And for the scientific community, that is a great way to utilize and build a community of advocates. It's also a cost-effective way to connect with others in the scientific community to promote a common cause, whether it's a piece of legislation, whether you're trying to advocate for funding. Advocating in numbers is always helpful. And most policymakers manage a social media account, and their staffers often use social media to stay up to date on news, policy news. And it also connects you with almost every reporter who uses social media, which is also a great way to spread the word on a cause that you care about. And as I mentioned, so policymakers are active on social media. In my previous role before I came onto AGU, I advocated on the local level, and our local council members are super active on Twitter, and it's what they use to communicate out to constituents. They hear from constituents, It is a great platform that a lot of policymakers utilize. Some of them have their own personal accounts, and they'll also have their accounts specifically for their office. But a lot of times they utilize both in order to interact with their constituents. And again, this is a great way to connect directly with them about a particular issue or bill, outside of emailing them or having a meeting with them. A lot of policymaking committees, whether again local, state, or on the federal level, a lot of those committees have pages as well. This is a great way to stay up to date on upcoming hearings, or bills that they may be potentially be voting on in the future. On the local level, it's a great way, especially like I said, for staying up to date on the hearings when hearings are happening. Local level, a lot of times constituents can testify at particular hearings. So this kind of information could be important for you. Oops, too fast. So here's some tips on kind of how to be heard on social media. So for your account profile, obviously you wanted one of the best practices is disclosing your employer, your location, and your background. And background could mean, for the scientific community, it can mean your science background. You definitely don't want to use a generic avatar. And what that means is if you have social media accounts, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, sometimes you may come across profiles that have just, a picture of a scenery, or a cartoon, and it's not a picture of the face. So what they mean by not using a generic avatar is making sure that you're using your face, something that the policymaker can actually see who it is that they're speaking with, or who they're interacting with on social media. And of course, personalize your profile. And then about what you post. So you want to balance the personal and your professional messages. And in other words, be human. You're not a robot. So you feel free to balance both your personal and professional messages on social media. Change topics from time to time. Contribute to original ideas and new perspectives. Be sure that you're contributing to move conversations forward, and not just to remain top of mind. And then focus on issues of emotional resonance for your audience, and in this case, it's going to be policymakers. So you definitely want to do. I know we have other sessions here during fall meeting where we're specifically talking about messaging with policymakers. And during those sessions, they made the point of making sure that you kind of research who your policymakers are, figuring out what they care about. So know who your audience is when it comes to your messaging, and then playing to current culture and trends. And then about what you share, just be polite in your back and forth, respond to comments. You're going to get comments on social media. Sometimes you'll get negative comments. It's best not to in a virtual atmosphere, not to necessarily delete those, but just kind of ignore them. Don't respond to those, kind of more negative comments. And don't make sure you're reposting or retweeting partners, and by partners I mean your scientific society, those who you're advocating alongside. Make sure you're retweeting their content, and this also includes giving them credit where it's due. And don't tweet the same message repetitively. Where that kind of works in the regular realm of in-person and emailing and interacting in the virtual world, it tends to be a turnoff. People tend to ignore when people are sending the same message over and over again. And then use how you say it. So use accessible language. Don't use jargon. Make sure that what you're putting out on social media is understandable to people who are going to be reading it. Be emotive and alluring, but not distasteful. Be personal, and be humble and not hierarchical. And I just want to note, so those that I've highlighted are especially important for being heard by policymakers. These are the factors that policymakers and their staffers pay special close attention to when they're interacting with constituents in a social media realm. So let's move on to the virtual meetings. So meeting dynamics have changed. Rather than meeting a policymaker or staffer in their office, you're now a virtual guest in their home. So thus, virtual meetings may require a bit more upfront planning. So consider how you're going to interact online and be able to adapt in the moment. So not in person, but still face-to-face. So when scheduling your meetings, you want to opt for technology where meeting participants are visible, and make sure that you're letting the office know what virtual platform you're going to be using. And some staff may not, if you're meeting with a staffer or a policymaker, they may opt not to use their video, and that's okay. Even if it's just you, and if you have a colleague with you, it's still helpful to use your video, especially because you can see facial cues. If the policymaker and staff are still on that platform, but just not on video, they can still see who they're talking to. So it's still a great idea to make sure that you use video when possible. And then make an extra effort to engage online. Supply offices with an agenda, a list of who's going to be attending that meeting, and any kind of digital pre-reading materials that you have, such as one-pagers, so that they can kind of get an idea of what the conversation is going to be like, and what the topics are going to be like before the meeting actually happens. And then offer scheduling flexibility. Be flexible about meeting dates and times. Policymakers and staff schedules are usually pretty busy. Plus, you have all the added issues caused by working from home, like childcare and sharing makeshift workspace with a partner. So keep that in mind when you're doing the scheduling for your virtual meeting. So regarding virtual meeting etiquette, so I'm going to share some best practices from my friend and colleague, Ryan Hopp, who has been podcasting for over a decade now. So he has lots of audio and video tech experience. His podcast is called Science Sort of, in case anyone wants to listen and check it out. So we know that video meetings are the norm these days. I mean, you're literally looking at me in a box on your computer right now. And yet we have all been in meetings where someone's microphone or headset didn't work, or they forgot to take themselves off mute, or they were totally backlit and you couldn't see their face, and or had another problem. So we're hoping to provide, here are some tips and tricks so you'll know that you look and sound good in your meeting, and you can focus on the content instead of tech issues. So this will be helpful for policymakers for the long run too, both because in the situation right now and because offices will keep doing this going in the future after we get back to quote unquote normal. It's been helpful for them to be able to meet with more constituents this way. So the most critical components of virtual meetings are video, audio, and the platform you're going to be utilizing. So I'm going to give you some tips for each of these. So for video, no backlighting, have a camera at eye level, kind of how I'm speaking to you now. An inexpensive webcam is likely better than your laptop camera. So it may be worth the investment for all the video meetings that you may be doing. And a great tip from Ryan is googly eyes on either side of your camera. So those little sticky eyes that you see on toys or that you can just buy at a craft store. He puts them on either side of his camera, so you actually look like you're looking at somebody. He found that super helpful. Regarding audio, headphones and an external mic are better than your laptop's built-in, so hence why I'm wearing these headphones right now and speaking with you that way versus through my computer. And remember that typing is very loud, especially if you're using the computer mic. And then regarding platform, make sure that you agree on the platform if there's going to be multiple people. And then obviously when you're working with scheduling a meeting with your policymaker, make sure that you agree on the platform and kind of who's going to be hosting ahead of time. If you're using a platform like Skype, make sure you exchange usernames and send out contact requests well in advance. Open software ahead of time. Get familiar with the updates. Connecting with an Ethernet cable, the little things that attach to your computer or your laptop, is a lot better than just working from a Wi-Fi connection. And then mute notifications on your computer before the meeting so that others aren't hearing dings and sound effects while you're talking to them. And remember to relax. It's okay if something doesn't go perfectly. We're all giving each other a little extra slack right now, adjusting to this new virtual world that we're living in. So let's talk a little bit about some helpful content for policymakers. So I mentioned before one-pagers, and we did a webinar recently with our Sharing Science colleagues at AGU back in September about one-pagers for policymakers. I believe that webinar is available online, so feel free to check that out. So one-pagers are incredibly important. They add more color to the topic and a clear picture of what the conversation will be about. And again, one of those best practices is to make sure that you're sending these one-pagers kind of ahead of time, so as a pre-read, rather than during the meeting, so that the policymaker and or their staffer can look at it ahead of time. Make sure that you're distilling the most critical data onto the one-pager. You don't want to put every fact and data point in the sun under the sun on a one-pager. Make sure that they understand and it's readable. It's more of a summary. You can follow up with them and give them more detail at a later point. It's also a great way to continue building that relationship with them as you follow up with them. And then using digital formats, making sure that email them a PDF. Feel free to use digital links in that PDF so that they can open different, if you have other sources that you're trying to get them to utilize, you feel free to use links in those PDFs. But digital formats are really working best in this current virtual atmosphere. And then another great important tidbit is to follow up. Again, this is about relationship building, making sure that they know that you're there as not just that you're a constituent, but that you're there as a resource for them, and that you're there to help. That you're there to help each other out. So to do that, you always want to send a thank you email, thank the policymaker for their time. You can add a reminder of the meeting topic for the office's reference, include information from a reliable source to keep that office aware of the issue. Attending virtual district events. So obviously right now in the current pandemic, in person is not ideal, but there are virtual town halls that policymakers do put on or that they're invited to. So make sure that, attend virtual town hall meetings and any other virtual meetings. That'll help increase your visibility with that policymaker. Find opportunities to engage in policy matters locally to serve as a trustworthy resource on the issue. And then stay in touch. You don't want to over communicate with policymakers, but do pass along new information as it comes, as it's released on the issue that you were meeting on, or if another new issue populates. Make sure that you're touching base with that office and meeting with them on that as well. Communicate in a respectful and an informative manner to gain the respect for you and your points of view. So now, before we go on to our live exercise, we're going to do a poll. So if you want, I'm going to give everybody here about a minute to kind of fill out this information. This will kind of help inform our work on the public affairs team and our exercise as well. So I'll just give everybody about a minute to do the poll. Looks like we got some responses coming in. Give everybody just a few more seconds if you haven't taken the poll to go ahead and put in your response. All right, so I will go ahead and, looks like we've got a couple more people in there. All right, we'll go ahead and post next. So looks about, about even across the board in terms of who's written emails and letters, who's used social media, and who's done both or neither. So about a decent mix here. So we're going to move on to do a live exercise for everybody. Let me just scroll over here. So I think Liz mentioned before in her presentation about getting those science policy news alerts. So one of the things that we utilize at AGU on the public affairs team a lot is our online platform to allow our members to be able to send emails directly to their policymakers on the Hill. And we typically will type up the emails for everyone. You basically just put in your information. So we're going to use that as a quick kind of practice on emailing your policymakers. It's something quick and easy you can do. So if you text science funds to 52886, what you'll see in the little phone on the slide, that's what you'll see on there. So this particular campaign, as you may or may not be aware, today is the final day for Congress to approve a continuing resolution that will keep the government open, basically, for another week. So it's only going to give Congress another week to finalize fiscal year 2021 appropriations bills. So we put together this campaign for everybody to message with their policymakers and let them know that CRs are bad for science. While it keeps the government open, it doesn't allow for that new and additional increase in funding for new programs and projects to go into place. So these messages will go out to the senators and to the representatives in the House to let them know that you want them to work now to finish those appropriations bills. So let me go to the next screen here so you can kind of see, this is kind of what you should see once you've clicked the link. You can see how I filled my information out on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you'll see, that it's because I'm in DC and I don't have a voting rep, but you will see my representative here is Eleanor Norton. And you can see the text here of the email. You can scroll through it and see it as well. We also give you the option to edit that email, include personalized information as you want. Personalized, just to put a plug in that personalized stories really stand out a lot better than just a regular standard email or a push email like this. So it's always best if you're interacting, if we ever put campaigns out like this via our Twitter or emails, feel free to go in and edit and add a personalized story on how that particular issue is impacting you. They respond very well to that. Let's see. Give everybody just a few minutes to fill that out if you would like to. If you have questions, please drop those in the Q&A box, and Liz will try to help answer some of those if possible. And then while people are doing that, I'm going to go on a little bit to talk a little bit more about kind of engaging policymakers on Twitter. So again, policymakers are often, most policymakers do carry or manage a presence on social media. There are unique audience that you may want to reach on Twitter as a constituent. Engaging with your local representatives is a great way to share your opinions and engage on issues and legislation. So these are just kind of a few tips specifically to Twitter. Obviously, you want to keep it short. There's limitations on how much you can put in there, but also because policymakers and their staffs are busy, so the shorter and more concise the messages, the better. Obviously, you want to be timely. Make sure that your posts are current with what's happening. So again, so I use the example. So if there's a budget resolution, or in this, as there is in this case, or budget bills that need to be passed, that's when you want to tweet it out. So you definitely want to post timely. Be engaging but informative, using infographics and photos when you can. Those are great ways to distill information. And then, of course, thanking your policymaker. It could be just as simple as, if your policymaker did something great, tweet at them, just thanking them, tagging them. It reinforces and lets them know that you support that their action on that particular issue, and lets them know to continue doing that and being a champion on that issue. So engaging on Twitter. So I gave a little snapshot. So you'll see this tweet. This tweet is for me, again, back in the day when I was doing education policy before I came to AGU. So you'll see this is from February 2019, last year. And I'm utilizing this to kind of show you just kind of some of the tips that I talked about earlier about social media. So you'll see here that I gave credit to one of the partners that I was working with on this particular issue. You'll also see here, this is kind of my ask. You may have, if you have attended one of our other sessions with one of my other colleagues about messaging to policymakers, they had talked about having an ask. So my ask here was fair access to school, which was basically a short hashtag version of a piece of legislation that had passed, that it be fully funded. So that was my ask in my tweet. And then kind of like, what's the benefit, so, and what's the purpose? So that, here in this case is that DC public schools can invest in evidence-based interventions for behavioral challenges. And then again, making sure that you're tagging your policymakers. So here, because I was on the local level, I was tagging our mayor, I was tagging our council member that was the head of the Committee for Education, and then our chairman, who's also, plays a huge role in the appropriations and funding process. So making sure you're tagging the appropriate policymakers. So another option that you can do is take over our Twitter account. It hasn't been done a lot, so we encourage more people if they would like to do so. Our Twitter account is at AGU Side Policy. You can take it over for a day and share your policy and outreach experiences. If you're interested in this, please let us know. Just send us an email at sciencepolicy@agu.org. We know our colleagues in the Sharing Science program also do that as well in terms of taking over their account for a day. So if you're interested specifically on sharing policy and outreach experience, feel free to do some outreach to us, and we'll work with you on that. And with that, I think we will go ahead, and I'm going to have Liz join me, and we'll do a little Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael, for that. Really appreciate that great presentation. Now we'll go to Q&A. So if anyone has questions that they haven't put into the box yet, please go ahead and do that, and we'll make sure that we get to them. The first question that we have is a common one that we get pretty often, asking about international students who are not U.S. citizens, who want to get involved in advocacy efforts in the U.S. This person wants to know how they could possibly add their voice. And I think this is a great question. And I'll start, Michael, and then I'd love to have your thoughts as well. It's important to know that you do not have to be a citizen of the US in order to advocate for science or for anything else. The policymakers want to hear from their constituents. They want to hear about their communities and constituents. So even if you're not a citizen, even if you can't vote in the US, you can still have those conversations with policymakers, and we really encourage you to do so. You can focus your message on the bigger impact on their constituents and the community there. That can be really helpful. And a lot of policymakers are very open to hearing from non-citizens and understand that, they are a critical component of our country and will understand that they have a voice as well. Michael, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add is that, as we've mentioned before, our policymakers really do care about what they're, to hear from their constituents. They prefer to hear from constituents than they do from lobbyists like myself. But on the other hand, it's not just about hearing from their constituents. It's also about hearing what's impacting their constituents. So, as Liz mentioned, if it's something, especially if it is something that's directly impacting their constituents, if your work, whether or not you are based in the U.S. or not, if your work is impacting their constituents, that's also important. They want to know that. So yes, please don't hesitate to do advocacy virtually with policymakers, whether you're international or not.
Great point, Michael. Thank you for that. Our next question, which I'll put to you first, Michael, is what types of advocacy outreach are the most effective?
Most effective, and I did a little bit, I focused on best practices on social media and meeting with your policymakers. Definitely meeting with a policymaker is definitely important, especially, again, if you can do a video meeting, having that, it's the next best thing of having that face-to-face conversation, because they get to, in a way, interact with you in person. And then social media. Social media is a great way to interact with them. Again, most policymakers manage a social media presence. They're looking at what their constituents are messaging at them. It's a great way to get in contact with them through direct messaging as well, and staying in the know about what they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add, I think any type of advocacy outreach where you're really working on developing a relationship with a policymaker, that is really going to help you be able to make more of an impact over time, because that relationship allows the policymaker's office to get to know you, to trust you, to listen to you more, and to come to you when they need help and expertise. And by developing that relationship, you're really able to achieve more over time. So I think whatever way is going to allow you to build that relationship by having relatively frequent contact, or by really getting to know the people in the office, I think that's going to be incredibly valuable. And then the next question here is, do I have to stick to a science-only message, or can I also talk about racial justice issues and other things I care about? I think this is a great question. I'll start with this one, and then Michael, I'll pass it to you. I do think that you can bring a couple of different messages if you kind of weave them together. If you have 5 different things that you feel really passionate about, it might be worthwhile setting up some different visits with the office over time to talk about things separately. Just because if you come in and ask for 5 totally separate things at once, that may be a little bit overwhelming, a little too much for the policymaker to be able to handle or help you with. But particularly for things like racial justice issues, which also really contribute to science policy issues, because it's so important to have a really diverse, inclusive 21st century workforce in order to sustain our, great science work that we've been doing in the United States, for example. If we can weave these stories together and show how supporting one issue really supports the other issue, I think that might be a great way to talk about a couple of different things you really care about in one meeting, as long as you don't overwhelm. Michael, do you have additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, what I'll add to that is, you are a constituent when you're meeting with your policymaker. And though, here today we're kind of focusing and talking to you as scientists, and talking about sharing your science with policymakers, you're still a constituent. So that doesn't mean that, if you're meeting with your policymaker and talking about science during one meeting, that, you can't meet with them about anything else, that you can only meet with them about science issues. And again, racial justice issues are often coinciding with science policy issues. But if there's another issue, if it's a racial justice issue that crosses over with a non-science related policy issue, it's okay to meet with your policymaker about that. You're a constituent. That's it is our job as constituents to make sure that we're informing our policymakers about issues that impact us and that we care about and that impact our loved ones. Even if it's a non-science policy issue, we definitely encourage you to continue engaging your policymakers on those issues that matter to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Michael. Thank you. Our next question is asking, what do you do if you contact your representative about a particular bill? They contact you back, letting you know that they're going to sign on, but then they don't. This person says, I know that calling them out on social media is not a good idea, but what are the recommendations to follow up if they end up not following through and voting for science? This is a great question. And I think it really goes back to the point of there are so many different things that the policymakers have to take into account. And it's so frustrating for us when science isn't that number one thing, but occasionally, something like this will happen. And this is definitely unfortunate, but occasionally something like this will come up. I really appreciate the fact that this person says, I know that calling them out on social media is not a good idea. I think that's great, in terms of keeping up a good relationship with the office. You're totally right that calling them out on social media is probably not a way to get them to build that positive relationship with you and build trust. I think a personal response back to the person who told you that they would sign on, asking, hey, I noticed this didn't happen. Can you tell me what happened? Can you give me a little more information? And trying to get a better picture of what happened, I think would probably be the most useful. You might find out that it really wasn't about the science at all, but there was something else going on. You may even, if you're really nice about it, they may feel bad that they weren't able to do this for you, and they may be more willing to help you out and do something for you the next time. So you could actually use it as a bit of a relationship building and trust building exercise, I think. Michael, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
And what I'll add to that is, yes, calling them, as Liz mentioned, calling them out on social media, that, will definitely prevent, that kind of building that relationship. But that doesn't mean that you can't express your, disappointment in their action. I definitely agree with what Liz said about, doing that outreach to the policymaker, trying to figure out, what was the reasoning behind, not signing on to a certain bill, co-sponsoring a bill, or voting in the way that they did. But you can also, message them and when you're, whether it's meeting with them or emailing with them and letting them know that you're disappointed in that decision that they made, and why, explain to them again why it was important that they should have voted in that particular way, or, sponsored or co-sponsored a particular bill. It just kind of reinforcing that messaging with them in a polite way, but still expressing kind of, again, that disappointment and why you as a constituent feel the way you do about that decision.
I think that's a great point, Michael. Thank you for that. Our next question, which I'll put to you first, Michael, is what approaches do you recommend for someone who has policymakers who haven't had a great history on science issues? How can I get through to them?
Sure. Yeah, and this could, I'm thinking, my brain automatically goes to a certain, to certain political party. But, there's members, policymakers, and various political parties that, whether they agree with science or not, or maybe science just isn't a priority for them. Um, it's really about making sure, it's about messaging, making sure that you're getting in front of those policymakers and letting them know that it's important. One thing that we see, especially on the federal level, in a lot of conservative states, is that there's a lot of intimidation in the science community about me, and not even just the science community, in the advocacy community in general, about going and meeting with somebody from the conservative party about science, because they think, well, that particular policymaker, this is the stance that they've had for a long time. Why waste the time of getting in front of them? And it goes back to the issue of constituents. If enough constituents, they care about what their constituents care about. Those constituents are putting them in office, and if enough of their constituents are getting in front of them and letting know this is an important issue, you can change their mind. You can push them and help them understand why they need to support science, why they need to fund science. They need to see it from their constituents. They need to hear from their constituents. They need to see and get that information from their constituents. Otherwise, they're going to get their information and their viewpoint elsewhere. So it's definitely worth, if you are trying to meet with a policymaker, I encourage you to bring colleagues with you. Bring your colleagues who are also constituents with you. If you're trying to advocate on a policymaker who's not your own policymaker, but maybe you can find a colleague who is their constituent and, set up a meeting with them. There's ways to do it. But again, it's really just getting in front of them and actually speaking with them and communicating and building that relationship with them.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing to think about is, if they're not supportive of science, how many scientists are actually going in there and talking to them and showing them how critical it is? And it isn't always a quick and easy fix, but it's so important. And I'll just expand on what Michael was saying in terms of messaging. It's really critical to meet them where they are, essentially. If they're in office that maybe isn't supportive of saying, yes, climate change is actually happening, it's here, it's something we need to deal with. Maybe there are other issues like increased flooding locally or wildfires or something like that they do care about, and you could talk to them about, even if you're not necessarily talking about climate change, using that phrase, you could be talking about a lot of the impacts that we're seeing locally and how that hurts their constituents, and they might be open to talking about that. So there's certainly ways that you could have that conversation and try and build that relationship that Michael was talking about. So our next question, and Michael, I'll send this to you first, is what should I do if I have newly elected policymakers that I want to introduce myself to? How and when do I try to start a relationship?
Honestly, the sooner the better. So if we're talking about, for example, the new Congress will be sworn in at the very beginning of January. They'll be, probably for the first month working on getting staffed up, getting their staffers. But, the sooner you get in front of them and start building that relationship, the better. You could probably already, on social media, go ahead and start doing outreach on social media, even though, maybe their emails and stuff are not set up on the Hill, or whether it's locally or state as well, just doing that outreach ahead of time, like say, hey, congratulations on, your new role and your election. I want to let you know I'm a constituent and scientist, and, want to introduce myself and, here, do your research on kind of what were the issues that they were campaigning on that was on their platform. See if there's a tie-in where you can talk about, perhaps climate change was a campaign issue, and say, this is very important to me. This is the field of science that I work in. I would love to work with you and help in any way I can ensure that, these campaign promises are achieved and that these policy issues are achieved. But yeah, just building that relationship ahead of time is probably the best spot.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, and I will say, as Michael mentioned, it can take particularly congressional offices, but other policymakers as well. It can take them a while to have full staff who are able to give them the level of support that they need in order to do their work. So, oftentimes when you start communicating with them, they can be a little slow to respond just because they don't have that staff in place yet. But it also offers you a really great opportunity to be one of the first people in who's talking to them and communicating with them and talking to them about important issues. Depending on what their key issues were when they were running for office, they may or may not have a lot of people that they know already in the sciences or in your field of expertise. So it's a great time to get to know an office and to become a resource to them as well. So we have time for just maybe one or two more questions here. Someone is asking, if I want to keep doing advocacy virtually in the future, is that going to be effective, or will I need to go do in-person meetings? I think that's a great question. I'm happy to start with that one. It is definitely something that we've heard a lot of policymakers find very valuable because they can meet with more constituents virtually than they could for those who are actually coming into the offices physically. It allows a lot higher access for a lot of individuals to be having these important conversations with policymakers. And I have a feeling that a number of policymakers are going to continue making virtual meetings or phone calls available, even once things go back to normal and we're able to have lots of in-person meetings again. I will say that in-person meetings are great to develop even more of a rapport, but if we've learned anything in the past, year, it's that you can do a lot of things virtually and do them well. So I think that if you're more inclined to do virtual meetings, that's probably something that you'll have the opportunity to do in the future as well. Michael, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, Liz. It's a challenge, even before the pandemic hit, for a lot of people across the country to be able to fly to DC and have in-person meetings with their members of Congress. And I'll say members of Congress actually do. They go back for like district days, and they'll have meetings in their district. But in the current pandemic, obviously that's still it's still not safe to do that. But yeah, I think from what we're seeing, from what a lot of the advocacy world is seeing, is that virtual advocacy is here to stay. It may shift a little differently once we get again back to that quote unquote normal space. But as Liz mentioned, a lot of policymakers are seeing the benefit of meeting virtually and being able to access more constituents than they could in the past. And this is not just, again, not on the federal level, but on the state and local level. Being able to have that interaction and get that information from their constituents is important. I think virtual advocacy is pretty much here to stay. It's definitely, for better or worse, this new virtual world we're living in has impacted our way of doing things, our way of advocating. I definitely think you'll see a lot. You'll still see it continuing on in the next year and on going forward for sure in some form or fashion.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And I think that is about all the time that we have. So I'd just like to say on behalf of Michael and myself, thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you will get more engaged in virtual advocacy. If you want to contact us, we are sciencepolicy@aju.org, and we would be happy to answer any questions or help you out. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your fall meeting.
Bye, everyone.